Hi there, Dolphin Doug here. I'm standing out here on the overlook over the Mendenhall Wetlands. They're really wet right now. We just passed the highest tide of the month. We're about a half an hour after it, and this was a 20-foot tide. Juneau has up to a 25-foot difference, highest high to lowest low. So it's late December now. You see the snow and slush that's out here. This land, in about an hour, will be dry. The tide's just starting to rush out, and I can very easily walk from here to these islands, the little ones out here, 80% of the time. So this is the main highway. If you come in here on a cruise ship, you're going to probably take a tour and you're probably going to go down that highway. You're going to see this, and this is all grasslands because the grasslands can get flooded and they keep growing during the short summer that we have. But I wanted to show you how not only it's kind of interesting how high this tide can be, but also it's cool seeing the snow, these chunks of ice floating out here. Here's some closer by that you can see. To say that there's a typical bit of weather at this time of year is just, it's not reasonable, because whether you're going for a walk or not, the tide makes a big difference, but the state of the ice makes a huge difference, and it just happens to be doing just a little bit of powdery snow coming down. It could be pouring down rain and 40 degrees here in late December just as easily. But the thing I'm trying to point out here are these tides, because I've lived here long enough to know that they're cool, but my daughter was just telling me she's living in New York, and she says, I don't understand it because they have sidewalks right next to the water. You would think that occasionally the tide would get kind of high. Well, here, in 1987 at Thanksgiving, there was a tremendous storm, and it hit just at the highest tide of the year. And so the water was a foot higher or a foot and a half higher than this, and the waves actually broke all the way across the highway. Big problem, didn't kill anybody, didn't cause trouble. A lot of saltwater places you didn't want it. But one of the things is that we have isostatic rebound, so that this land I'm standing on right here, the highest tide of the year is a half-inch lower every year because the land is rising up. Because a couple thousand years ago, this is Lemon Creek Valley. You can't see it, but there's a little hanging glacier right at the top. A couple thousand years ago, this whole section of countryside, including all the wetlands we're standing on top, was covered with thousands of feet of ice. So that squished the land down, the ice melts off, and now the land is bouncing back. It's something like a half-inch a year here. It's bouncing back, I think, at about 1.75 inches in Glacier Bay itself. And that may not sound like all that much, but it's a one-way process. So these little islands out here with the trees on them, you know those trees cannot grow if their roots hit salt water. So that tells you not too long ago, that was where those trees that are 20 years old could establish themselves. There are some other little islands that I passed, and we don't need to worry about the specifics. They have little tiny trees on them, and when I looked, I couldn't see any land underneath of them. But they're on just that little patch of soil. Those roots don't get hit by salt water, and it does not kill them. So that's all changing going along here. But these tides are really what I wanted to talk about, in that if you come from a place like New York City, you don't have big tides. Now, there are lots of places in this world that have bigger tides than Juneau. The Bay of Fundy is famous, and that's not too far north of New York City. It's got something over 40-foot tides. And then there's, I can't remember the name of it right now, Turnagain Arm, close to Anchorage, farther north from here. They have, I believe, a 33-foot tide. Both of those places are famous because not only do they have those enormous tides, but they have long runs of almost flat tide flats. So those places get what's called a bore tide, where when the water comes roaring in, as the old water was rushing out, the water comes roaring in and it makes a wave. And I've seen that in Turnagain Arm. The one I saw was 6 inches tall, but it can get several feet tall. And if you happen to go out on the tide flats in that environment, when you're clamming or something and you're not paying attention to the tide, you can get hit by that boar tide. The boar tide itself probably isn't that bad, but the flooding waters afterwards that are in the 30s get you in real trouble real fast. You're going to get pushed along, and people have played out in the mud and gotten stuck out there, gotten hit by the tide. They get taken out fast. Juneau doesn't have that. I have spent a lot of time out here. If you were a fool, not paying attention to the tide, and you went out to that island and took a nap, you'd be stuck out there until the tide dropped, and then you could just walk out. The tides are 12 hours between high tides, so 6 hours after this, the tide's going to be something like 22 feet lower, maybe 23 feet lower than it is today, right now. And it takes a while. Most of that change from high to low occurs in the middle 2 hours. Right after high tide, it's really slowly falling, and then right when it's almost at low tide, it slows down an awful lot. So I just wanted to say, you can come here as you drive by in your bus from the cruise ships. You're going to see this area. It's going to be full of grass. And if you remember this video, you'll say, oh yeah, that water's here. It's real. You can tell when you see these islands where the trees are, it's when the rest of this is wide open grassland. The reason for that is because of the salt water. So here we are. This is Juneau. This is why people don't come up here in the winter. I've got it's nominally a 6-hour day, but it's dark and dismal. It's about 1:45 in the afternoon and the sun sets. It's gonna be dark at 3:30. Now it takes a long time to get light, and it takes a long time to get dark because we're so far north. You can see these mountains south of me. The sun actually arches just above these mountains and is probably up here somewhere right now. And then it's going to drop down where there's very little mountain. There's mountains further away. But this is a particularly sunny spot. This woodland area behind me, that's known as Sunny Point. And it's because they're far enough away from the island from the mountains south of them, that the sun clears it in the wintertime. So when the sun is above the horizon and we don't have heavy clouds, you can see it. And so it makes a big difference. You can imagine these houses I'm looking at. These are waterfront houses on North Douglas Island. They're behind the mountains. For 3 months in the summer, they will never have direct sunlight. I'm not specifically. They might have an hour of sunlight in the morning or an hour of sunlight in the afternoon, but exactly where your house is makes a big difference. So here you go with the tide flats. That's what I wanted to show you. And you'll probably enjoy yourself a little bit more if you come in sometime when it's a little bit warmer. Ciao.